Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you, of course, by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Glad to be with you on the 29th day of May, 2018. Hope everybody enjoyed their holiday weekend. Of course, Memorial Day yesterday. And I'll tell you, when it comes to the major summer holidays, and of course, you have the 4th of July, which is known as the Independence Day of the United States of America, has its significance. Labor Day, as you get towards the first week of September. There's a lot of value in those holidays, but the one that stands out a little more than others is Memorial Day, because Memorial Day is a day that we remember our veterans, and we remember everybody that served our country in any major war or even is involved in the military. And it's amazing how things have changed now, because we have our veterans and the people that are in the military now that are doing it more as a choice, as opposed to years ago when many didn't have a choice. And when you think of Memorial Day, it obviously is a time in a sense to respect all of the military veterans, every single one, especially those that did make a choice. Those that say, hey, I'm going to be part of the military. I'm going to be involved if there's conflict in a war and potentially risk my life to help that of somebody else, or to risk my life for the freedoms that many of us who do not choose to be in the military have. And, going back years ago, many Americans did not have that choice. And the drafts of wars going back, obviously, to well before World War I, Americans, based off of their age group, and in some cases, bad luck situations, were called into duty. Now, the majority of them accepted the responsibility. And, of course, it wasn't until the time of Vietnam where there really was any resistance on a national level from people that were against it, people that were drafted to say that, hey, we're going to dodge it, I'm not going to go into the war, why should I have to? And obviously that was a sense in the change, and you saw the change as it's kind of worked its way into society now. There is no draft, and anybody that does involve themselves in the military is doing it based off of their choice. But obviously a little, ton of respect goes out to all those that choose to put themselves first and risk their lives before that of many that they don't know. And obviously a lot of respect to those who didn't have the choice but ended up losing their lives as well. The one thing I did want to get into today, if anybody followed the Indy 500, and, we had a winner. Will Power ends up winning the Indy 500. And one of the very few times a year that it brings non-racing fans out to the forefront. Obviously, if you follow, racing week in, week out, you know about every single one of the drivers. And you may have thought whatever about Will Power's chances to win the Indianapolis 500. Now, obviously, it's a national thing. It's like that team in the NFL that wins the Super Bowl. And it could be a team that nobody knows about, but once they win the Super Bowl, there's a lot of people that are not football fans. They may not be sports fans, but they know the team that won the Super Bowl. They may know the person that was distinguished enough in the game to be the star, the person that had won the game. Same thing kind of applies to the Indianapolis 500. So obviously there's a lot of jokes and puns and innuendos out there about Will Power. A guy who's obviously driving a race car. You need a little more than willpower to win a race. Obviously, the jokes are probably a little bit old at this point. But the same thing that I could think of when you think of players that have names that have puns that could be attended and used to them. Think of Ryan Theriot in Major League Baseball. Very good player for a handful of years with the Cubs and played for a couple other teams. It says on the back of his shirt, his name is spelled out, Theriot. Looks like it says the Riot. Obviously, that led to his nickname, which was the Riot. But I'm sure for years upon years, including now, he's got people that look at his name and are like, wow, your name spells the Riot. Pretty similar to Will Power. You know, Will Power is a racer. And you have to ask him at some point, do those puns and innuendos and jokes, do they get old after a while? Sometimes they do. But I'm sure there'll be that person that'll look at your name and say, wow, I am the one that discovered that Will Power's name could be Will Power, like in Will Power. And nobody in the history of the world figured this out before I did. That's still going to happen. Just like, you know, the tweet I sent out, I don't know, years ago in the postseason. This was when Ryan Theriot was playing in the postseason. And I obviously set it out as a joke. You know, Ryan Theriot's name spells the Riot. Now we're going to have a lot of people on the other side of that. They're going to take every mention of sarcasm in a literal way. And of course I got some people, oh, well, you didn't know that? You know, that's why he's called the Riot. But then we have an issue when it comes to sarcasm in social media. Because how do you do sarcasm when it comes to social media? Nobody sees the tone of your voice. If you hear me talking, you'll know when I'm being sarcastic and when I'm not being sarcastic. But if I type it in a tweet, how are you going to understand the tone of what I'm saying? In fact, it would make more sense if you're reading a tweet to take it in the literal sense of the words that are being said. And that's why I had a big issue a couple of years ago with somebody on Twitter talking about Chris Sale and the value of a win. You know, his attempt at sarcasm was set to be taken in such a literal form because it was typed out on Twitter without any sort of, symbols or anything to, emojis were not attached to it. So obviously the words were taken as they would have been if they were in a literal sense. Same thing happens with, a joke about Ryan Theriot. Hey, his name spells the Riot. He could say it in sarcasm with the understanding that everybody knows that that's what his name says. The same thing with Will Power. Will Power wins the Indianapolis 500. Obviously, we understand there's puns associated with the name of Will Power. But if you make a joke about it, the joke comes out as being taken in a literal sense. Now, I'm not going to make any jokes about it. I think enough people will. And like I said, 10 years from now, whether Will Power is racing or not, there's going to be somebody that's going to come up and say, hey, Will Power. That's a great name for a racer. Kind of like early win in baseball for a pitcher. Once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Over the next couple shows, we're going to get the phone lines going again, and I'm glad to bring that in. We'll be taking a couple calls for each show. I set it up to a point where you're not going to ring directly into the show. So I will have an operator that's going to be taking calls, put you on hold, the whole thing, and we'll limit it to about 2 or 3 calls per show. And I'm excited to get that going because if those of whom who've listened to the show for a while remember, I was taking calls off of a regular, wireless telephone, a landline. Which, yeah, at some point would have been okay, but obviously had a little bit of issues with it. But I'm glad probably at some point this week, if not at the very latest, early next week, we'll be taking about 2 or 3 calls per show. Obviously talking about baseball, sports, and unifying America. Obviously the thing that we probably should talk about as we get ourselves set for another NBA Finals and another essential repeat of what we have seen each of the last 3 years. And that, of course, is the Golden State Warriors playing against the Cleveland Cavaliers, which seems like, and I've said this before, I said this at the beginning of 2 seasons ago, because I don't know if I was 100% bought into a Cavaliers-Warriors finals this year for the fourth year in a row. I know it would have been a safe pick, an absolute safe pick. There wouldn't have, if you said that, hey, that's going to be my NBA finals, it's kind of like Chris Berman going back to the early 1990s every single year saying the Buffalo Bills and the San Francisco 49ers. Well, for a certain amount of years, or what was it, about 5 out of 6 years or 6 out of 7 years, one of those two teams made it to the Super Bowl. So if you wanted to go safe when it comes to the National Basketball Association picking an NBA Finals, and you said Warriors, Cavs, nobody could really get on you. Nobody could really give you a hard time over it. But this year seemed to be a little bit different. The amount of changes that existed with the Cleveland Cavaliers roster, the construction of the players around LeBron James, the trade of Kyrie Irving, I think made a big difference. You know, you looked at potentially a balance and shift of power going in to the Boston Celtics. And the Boston Celtics, who did not have Kyrie Irving last year, have Kyrie Irving this year. And obviously the good young talent that exists with that team. The one thing I got to say about the Celtics is they're going to be good for a very long time. And there's no way that, we're going to deny the fact that if there is a team that is going to be able to compete with the Golden State Warriors on a year in and year out basis. And I know, listen, the Cavaliers up to a certain point have. The Cavaliers deserve a little bit of credit because they won an NBA championship against the Golden State Warriors. They came back 2 years ago from a 3-1 deficit and ended up winning themselves an NBA championship. So they deserve some credit for that. But do they really compete with the Warriors? Are they really on the same level or the same page as the Golden State Warriors? Because we've spoken about it. If it's the Cavs that get themselves to the NBA Finals, the question is going to be more of a matter of how many games do they last? How long until the Golden State Warriors finish them off? Now, I believe next year, if you get the Boston Celtics at full strength, is a team that is more on the same playing field and level of the Golden State Warriors. But a couple points I wanted to get into about the finals. First of all, with the Cavaliers beating the Celtics in Game 7, I guess you could say it's a little bit improbable, the way that series had shooken itself out. The home team went in the first 6 games, and Boston, when they were on home court, kind of dominating the 6 games that they played and ended up winning. The 3 games. So for the Cavaliers to go out there after a good win in Game 6, a game that came a little bit down to the wire. I mean, it wasn't necessarily, a nail-biter. You kind of got the sense that the Cavs in Game 6 were kind of winning, pulling away. LeBron hits a couple shots late. Obviously, he got, the beating on his chest, the Tarzan, the whole thing. And the Cavaliers send it to Boston for Game 7. But coming into Game 7, I'm not sure. And I know, listen, if LeBron James wins or the Cleveland Cavaliers get themselves to the NBA Finals, it wasn't going to shock anybody. But I would say for the first time in a while, the Cavs had that underdog type of role in them. And if you look at the first half of the game and you go back to the performance of both the Cavaliers and the Boston Celtics, some sloppy play, some turnovers here and there, which did not obviously look good. The Cavaliers turned the ball over a little bit more. But neither team was making shots. The Celtics were off from three-pointers, from three-point land all day, missing shots left and right. And the Cavaliers didn't get off to a good start. LeBron James got himself in position, drew the double team, flipped the ball out. Kyle Korver's missing shots. J.R. Smith's missing shots. Everybody's missing shots for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So the fact that game came into halftime with the Celtics just up 4, I thought boded pretty well for the Cavaliers, but there was a turning point in this game, and the turning point in this game could have gone clearly either way. It was the decision that LeBron James made. And if you're LeBron James and you're going out there playing against a good team in Boston, but playing with a group of players that aren't necessarily Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman, are not necessarily Shaq and Pau Gasol. You're looking at a group of players that are good, they're good role players, but aren't necessarily superstar caliber. In other words, if LeBron James gets hurt, the Cavaliers don't have any chance. It's just that simple. So if LeBron James is off and he's not hitting shots and all of a sudden you need somebody to rely on, it's going to be tough to do. So I would understand, and I think a lot of America would have understood, if LeBron James came into the second half of that game and said, hey, I absolutely 100% have to win this game by myself. And if he did that and he led the Cavs to victory, you would say, wow, this guy does it all by himself. If he went out there, gave it his best, took every shot, and the Cavaliers fell a little short, he would have the excuse that he doesn't have a good enough team around him. What LeBron James chose to do, and this is something that did not get covered, this is something that happened in the midst of everybody saying LeBron James has no help and had to do it all by himself. LeBron James depended on his teammates in the second half of that game. The same teammates that missed a series of shots in the first half of that game. He passed the ball to Kyle Korver, who hit that off-balance shot as he was falling to the ground. He found Jeff Green. He found J.R. Smith. J.R. Smith was completely quiet all game, but still managed to get him the ball in key situations to hit a big shot. And I think that gets hidden in LeBron James' game because we just understand that that's who he is. He does get all the credit when the Cavs win, and obviously he's going to get all the blame when the Cavs lose. And whether the Warriors knock out the Cavs in 4 games, 5 games, 6 games, or 7 games, it's going to be LeBron James' fault that the Cavaliers lost. So he deals with both ends of the spectrum. He gets all the credit for getting the team to where he did, but for not winning the championship, he harnesses all the blame. It's a team game, and I tell you, the NBA is frustrating because it's hard to grab that player. You know, imagine the Cavaliers with Jason Tatum. You know, for a second. I mean, he's a rookie for the Celtics. You know, the draft picks work themselves in a certain way. Let's say that, you know, the Cavs were involved in the lottery in some way, shape, or form, and they took themselves Jason Tatum. That's probably a perfect player to play alongside LeBron James. That's a guy that at least you could trust to make a big shot in a big spot, but to run the offense if, let's say, LeBron James is sitting on the bench. He had to play 48 minutes in Game 7 because, you know, who's leading the offense without him? And that's why if LeBron James decides to go somewhere else, the Cleveland Cavaliers are in trouble. You know, it's not like you're going to be able to get that superstar player to get yourself back into the playoffs. The Cavaliers don't have themselves that. Yes, they have themselves a good draft pick, you know, top 10 pick this year that they acquired from Boston in the Irving trade. Had themselves a couple number 1 picks. Irving was one of them. You know, taking Andrew Wiggins. They took Michael Bennett. I think that's the guy's name. He's not in the NBA anymore. But the Cleveland Cavaliers seem to have themselves a first overall pick more than others. A better chance to get that star player to build your roster around. But what stands out is LeBron James still believed in his teammates. A team that has been so much in turmoil. A team that has not looked good at certain points of the season. A team that had to be completely shut down and rebuilt at the trading deadline. So for those of you who are saying the same old Cavaliers, same old Warriors, which I understand why you feel that way. You know, there aren't too many times in the history of the National Basketball Association, or any sport for that matter, when you have the same teams meeting in the NBA Finals in consecutive years, 3 straight years, or 4 straight years. So I understand from the casual basketball fan or even the diehard basketball fan that ends up just wanting to see a little bit of something different. The Celtics being involved in the NBA Finals is something that we've seen, 30 times? Right? Celtics, 16-time NBA champions? 17 times, however many. But if you go back to the history of the NBA, and this is going back to 1947, you've seen very few instances where even the same two teams played in the NBA Finals 2 years in a row. 1960, 1961, the Celtics beat the St. Louis Hawks in consecutive years. Celtics in 65 and 66 played the Lakers. 68, 69 played the Lakers again. And just one of those, things that you would figure, hey, maybe this is something that we'd be in some sort of chartered waters before. And going back, you got the Bulls and the Jazz in 97 and 98. And obviously, you've seen what's happened the last 4 years. So in the NBA history, you've only seen teams face each other in consecutive NBA Finals 2 years in a row. And like I said, with all those Celtics teams who won those 11 championships in 13 years, you'd figure they would have played the same team more than twice. And they didn't. Obviously, Major League Baseball. If you look at the history of Major League Baseball, you have 1920 through 1923, where the New York Giants and the New York Yankees ended up playing 3 years in a row. The Giants beat the Yankees in 1921 and 1922, which, by the way, was the Yankees' first trip to the World Series in the history of their franchise. Of course, Babe Ruth was there. He had a lot to do with it, right? And in Major League Baseball, you've seen teams play each other in the World Series in consecutive years. Most recently, you got the Yankees playing the Los Angeles Dodgers in 1977 and 1978. But that was only one time it had happened where there was the same two teams 3 straight years. In the NFL, I'm actually doing this on the fly right now. I'm not sure if it's happened in the NFL. If there's been the same two teams that have played in the Super Bowl consecutive years. Of course, you had 93 and 94. Super Bowls, 27 and 28. The Cowboys beat the Buffalo Bills 2 years in a row. And I always get the sense, and this is something that's always confused me, and obviously the diehardest of diehard football fans will put me in my place. I always got that sense that the Green Bay Packers and the Denver Broncos played each other in the Super Bowl 2 years in a row. 1 year the Packers won, the next year the Broncos won. But I always get that first Super Bowl confused. Packers beat the Patriots and Drew Bledsoe and Bill Parcells in 1997. But I got Cowboys, Bills, 2 Super Bowls in a row. And I don't think we've had anything that has duplicated itself since. So what we're seeing in the NBA is something that, while a fan may say that it's a little bit boring, or they may not enjoy it as much as if, let's say, the Houston Rockets had won last night. If the Houston Rockets had won last night, we'd be looking at a completely different NBA Finals, probably one that would favor the Cavaliers and LeBron James. But I tell you, if you look at the history of sports, instead of saying, hey, same old NBA Finals, same old Cavaliers and Warriors, probably the same old Golden State Warriors NBA championship, take a moment to look at what this stands for in the history of professional sports. Because teams don't get to championship finals in consecutive years that often. I just showed it in football. One time in the history of the Super Bowl have the same two teams played a Super Bowl in a row. Just one time in Major League Baseball, the same two teams played in a World Series 3 years in a row. You know, you've had teams that have played in 3 consecutive World Series, but not against the same opponent. You've had teams in baseball get to consecutive World Series against the same opponent. The 1942 and 1943 Yankees and St. Louis Cardinals. So there's a handful of times it happened twice. But the fact in the NBA, especially with the history of the Boston Celtics winning all those championships in the 1950s and 60s, the fact that they did not match up with the same team 3 years in a row, let alone 4 years in a row. You're looking at something that happened just now. 4 straight NBA Finals with the same two teams. I don't think you're ever going to see that happen again. I did have to get a little bit into the Rockets-Warriors game, because I think what had worked for the Houston Rockets up to a certain point and had allowed for them to even win a game in Oakland was the fact that there was a little more of a supporting cast in Houston than we let on to. You know, Tucker and Gordon, Capella. Guys that hadn't gotten a lot of attention this year, in a year where the Houston Rockets were about James Harden and Chris Paul. And the third biggest personality on that team was their coach, Mike D'Antoni. And what had put the Rockets in a position where they were up 3-2 with a chance to close out the Golden State Warriors in Oakland was the fact that there was a little more of a balanced attack, and the game was not 100% dependent on James Harden, and dependent on James Harden in the same way that the Cleveland Cavaliers were depending on LeBron James. And I'm sure James Harden would like to be able to carry an NBA franchise. He would like to have the ability to do some of the things that LeBron James can do, but he can't. He's not as good of a defender as LeBron James. He's certainly, and LeBron James is not going to be mistaken for the best shooter in NBA history, but Harden is nowhere near the same shooter that even LeBron James is. So what you saw happen in certain spurts of the Western Conference Finals kind of reared its ugly head in Game 7. James Harden, within his own mind and his own head, could put himself mentally in the same body, in the same suit as a Steph Curry and a Klay Thompson. He is nowhere near, obviously, if he's not the same shooter as LeBron James will never be on the same level as Steph Curry and Klay Thompson as a shooter. So when James Harden brings the ball up and starts flinging up three-pointers well behind the three-point arc, that's when I realized the Houston Rockets were in trouble. When the Rockets were getting a balanced attack, Harden hitting mid-range jumpers, which were something that was more capable of him being able to hit. Him driving to the net and drawing the foul. Him drawing the double team and kicking it out to one of his teammates, whether it's a Gordon or a Tucker, to hit a big shot. You didn't see that. And when you looked at the second half of Game 7 and the Golden State Warriors starting to pull away, you started to not be surprised. I give James Harden credit for showing up this year, which he didn't do last year. And I spent this entire NBA season knocking James Harden because when the games mattered the most last year, he was nowhere to be found. Did he try maybe too hard? Did he maybe not believe in the rest of his roster the same way LeBron James believed in the rest of his roster? That could have been the difference. Rockets with a home game and obviously throughout the first half had a pretty good lead. It slipped away, of course. But I do give the Rockets a little bit of credit. They outperformed what I would have expected them to do. The Houston Rockets, I expected when the games meant the most to run and hide and crumble and try to be out of sight as quick as they possibly could. And they didn't do that. So for that, they deserve some respect. Respect goes to the coach, D'Antoni. Respect goes to James Harden, even though he should have believed in his teammates a little bit more. He shouldn't have been taking 40-foot jump shots that had no chance of going in anyway. I mean, NBA player throwing up air balls, there's no excuse for that. It may happen once in a while, once every 5 games that you watch. But anybody that does it on a consistent basis should be ashamed of themselves. They're professionals. So I expected James Harden to run and hide, and he didn't. So I give him credit for going out there and playing. Unfortunately, he fell a little bit short. You wonder what the Rockets would be if Chris Paul was there. I think it's a fair enough argument. The fact that they took the Warriors to 7 games is a little bit of a stepping stone. But once again, Cavs, Warriors, finals. Hate to say it, as much as I like LeBron. Warriors in 4. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Catch up on some baseball, maybe a little bit of NFL. Anything that's on your mind. Like I said, we're going to build the phone lines in, so we'll be taking about 2 or 3 calls for every show going forward, whether it's sometime towards the end of the week or the beginning of next week. This is the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Hopefully everybody enjoyed their Memorial Day. Hopefully everybody spent a little time to think about those who have served, whether they're close to them, or if you don't know anybody that served, there's many people that have given their lives for you, that have volunteered their own lives. In some cases, were called into the military and drafted without a choice.